Understand how a company is behaving and working, it's changing, moving, it has to be managed, etc. The fourth field is the world. They have to understand how the world is working. And the fourth field is themselves. They have to develop as persons. So this kind of education is extremely appreciated by the company.
In fact, all this education is done in close partnership with top French companies. These grandes écoles are impressive places, but they're notoriously difficult to get into. The competition is intense and normally involves an extra 2 years of education at school after the baccalaureate. Solène Devreau was one of only 2 people from her year group of 90 to get in. She has 2 master's degrees, one from Vienna, and is now doing a PhD.
We do a broad variety of subjects. Like before I went to Vienna, I studied a bit of quantum mechanics, thermal engineering, even philosophy of sciences, so really a bit of everything. We're not that specialized. It only comes in the last year of our studies. So it's very easy for us to get into very different kinds of jobs. What we learn in this school is to adapt, to be able to adapt very fast to any new subject that comes. So we could go into mechanics or into thermal engineering or into chemistry and just take a couple months to adapt. And I think that's the big strength of schools like here.
So all that very intensive study and hard work means that you're actually completely rounded and very flexible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is not just all about producing the best scientists or academics. They emphasise social and leadership skills as well. You don't graduate from universities like this if you're a socially awkward science nerd, which helps explain why graduates from Centrale Super Elec are some of the highest paid in France. Highly educated and trained managers, skilled staff, high investment in technology and machinery, hard-working workers, and an excellent system of infrastructure that covers the whole country. It's easy to see what France is doing right, and on top of all that, Philippe Askenazi says France's geography keeps it on its toes. It's surrounded by ultra-efficient countries like Switzerland and Germany, and low-cost ones like Spain. But if France really is such a productive country, why is it so often seen as the sick man of Europe? Growth has been slow and intermittent. Unemployment is double that of the UK. At the OECD's headquarters in France, the security is tight. Everyone's bags are scanned and searched just like at the airport. And inside the headquarters is a team that studies France. I went to meet one of the economists in her small office piled high with weighty tomes of labour force statistics. While the team admires its productivity, Nicolas Brandt says France gets a lot wrong as well.
Some large firms are very productive, very innovative. But there is a dichotomy, if you will, in the economy. So at the same time, there are many very small companies, and they are not very productive, and often they are rather old. So the firm dynamics are not as vibrant in France as they are in other countries. But what is lacking a little bit is medium-sized firms that are strong, like, for example, in Germany. So that makes more for the weaknesses of the French economy.
One reason France is failing to grow efficient medium-sized companies is because the barriers to setting up and growing a firm in France are legion.
It's more difficult to enter the market. Forming a corporation in France is cumbersome, administration is cumbersome, taxation is cumbersome, which is always more difficult for smaller firms. And that's keeping a little bit on firm growth. And then there's a number of threshold effects in terms of taxation and also labor regulations, representation of trade unions, which we think inhibits firm growth.
Down a dark alley in a slightly seedy part of Paris is a new web company called Legal Start, based in a couple of crowded rooms.
Oh, bonjour. Is Tim here?
Timothée Rambaud knows all about the problems of starting a small business. Leading us quickly through a room stuffed with tables and young workers handling calls, we climb some distinctly rickety stairs. Legal Start is a start-up business that helps other French companies start up with a website that helps them deal with red tape, form filling and legal problems, all for one simple fee.
There was a big inefficiency between the need for standard legal services and the actual offer, so offered by traditional players such as accountants and lawyers, pretty expensive and not customer-focused. So we believe there was a great opportunity to develop this solution directly online.
Timothée is a young entrepreneur, a former high flyer at Goldman Sachs, and of course, yet another graduate of an engineering grande école. But his company has a problem itself that can't be solved online. If it continues to grow, it will soon have 50 members of staff, and that is a real problem.
There is a threshold at 50 that adds significant administrative burden to entrepreneurs. It's a waste of our time and energy to focus on this instead of focusing on developing our company.
Legal Start, Timothée says, would have to have bodies representing staff, recognise unions, organise committees and fill in a lot of paperwork. It's hardly surprising that so many French companies never employ more than 49 people and go to pretty extreme lengths to stay small.
The truth is we will probably try to avoid that. We're thinking about solutions. You might want to outsource specific tasks. You might want to divide your companies into subsidiaries, different companies, and just to avoid going through the threshold. If you start having an additional administrative burden without having the size to manage it, that's what kills you.
Which is why there's a dearth of medium-sized companies in France. It pays to stay small. But red tape is only one part of what is holding France back. Productivity is also high for a bad reason. France has a high level of unemployment, around 10%, which is double the UK rate, and a low rate of employment because it's just not worth employing many French people, says Nicola Brandt from the OECD again.
I do have to say that this high level of productivity is in part also related to one of its major weaknesses, which is the low employment. So because of a combination of a relatively high minimum wage, high labor taxes, so labor costs are very high. And then there is a large part of the adult population with relatively weak skills. And what that basically does is that large parts of the population are excluded from the labor force. They're not working. So in some ways, the lowest productivity workers are not in the labor force.
That means, in part, the high level of investment by French companies is designed to replace expensive and unproductive workers with machines, computers and robots, which rather flatters the French productivity figures. After all, it's easy to improve your productivity if you just take away your least productive people and don't let them work.
We call that the batting average effect.
John Van Reenen says, think about it in terms of cricket.
There's two ways you can increase the average number of runs per batsman in cricket. Everybody could get more efficient and start, hitting more fours and sixes, which would be great. So that would be a good productivity increase. But the other way you can increase productivity would be to shoot all the tail enders. So that means, you'd end up with just your best half of your batsmen playing and they would have high average productivity. But the reason is that you've just got rid of all your tail enders. They're all unemployed now. And that's not a good way of increasing your productivity in terms of economic welfare.
So that rather points to the idea that productivity in itself isn't an end in itself, because that cricket team would be very productive, but they'd lose the match.
Exactly.
Also, although the French government has tried to deregulate some aspects of employment, that's not helping. Professor Philippe Askenazi of the École Normale Supérieure.
With a two-digit unemployment rate, the French politicians have tried to promote some niches to increase the number of people at work. And one of them is really spectacular. It's the development of self-employment and the independent contractor.
Spectacular because France is known for having a largely salaried workforce with very protected rights. These new independent workers are more flexible and cheaper for firms to use, but this all comes at some cost.
They accept to be paid at at a very low level. There is no minimum wage, of course, for independent contractors. And so we have now a sort of new working pools. And what we observe is that the productivity of independent contractors dropped by around 20% in just a couple of years. So for at least a part of the population, we are moving to a sort of British model with low productivity, low cost society. So that's one of the parameters which explain why the productivity is quite flat in France.
Although productivity is at a high level in France, productivity hasn't been growing recently, and it's been flat for several years now. Those increases in 0 hours contracts and the number of self-employed are dragging down the average because those workers are less productive. But even so, France is getting a lot of things right. It's pretty much on a par with both Germany and the USA, two comparable economies and two of the most productive in the world. All different countries are, of course, productive in different ways. In Germany, the apprenticeship scheme makes it world-beating. In America, its management is brilliant. In France's case, its labour market inflexibility is offset by high investment, excellent education and good management. But a winning formula is not necessarily transferable to other countries and cultures, according to John van Reenen.
These different countries have entirely different histories, so the ability to put into effect different policies depends on, the history and the culture and the institutions of your country. So in every country, you have to start off where you are and then think of how you can make improvements to make your country more productive. But it can be done.
What's more, in France, Philippe Askenazi thinks the French model of work has been taken as far as it can, maybe too far, as those with jobs suffer from a high level of work-related illnesses.
The pace of work is extremely high, and the life expectancy in good health condition is stagnating in France and even is declining for former female workers. And I think that we are facing a sort of limit of this French model. So this is eventually a social choice rather than a sort of economic choice.
Meanwhile, the British don't really notice all that hard work in France. They have a tendency to look down their noses at French working methods, the short working week, the long lunch breaks and even longer holidays. The French believe that all goes to make you a better worker. It enables you to work more intensively when you are on the job. And John van Reenen says there's evidence to support that. However, he urges caution.
Working through your lunch hour, you might say, that's a bad thing. But what about taking an extra tea break at 4 o'clock and 11 o'clock and, maybe having a little nap at 9 o'clock? At some point, it may not make you more productive having more and more time off. So it's going to be trying to find the right balance, I think.
Well, I'm willing to risk it.
There are some things from France that just wouldn't work in other economies. Americans work long hours and take few holidays. The UK economy has made a success by employing many low-skilled workers. The French system means an excellent quality of life paid for by high wages for those in work and generous benefits for those out of work, although in turn that means taxes and borrowing are also high. But if you want to catch up with the French, you don't have to copy everything they do, just lift some of their best ideas. That means the obvious solutions for those looking to improve their productivity are better education, more investment, more infrastructure, and much better management.